Okay, so let's start talking about Windows Virtual Desktop, or WVD. This obviously is a Microsoft Azure initiative. It only works in Azure. It's kind of their Windows desktop virtualization direction in a way, I guess, kind of. It certainly doesn't replace some of their traditional methods. It's more of an add-on just up on Azure. But I think what most people would be interested in is you can run Windows 10 in multi-user mode. Parallels has added some integration with this, so we kind of integrate with it up on Azure, and that kind of brings the benefits of, I guess, both capabilities. You get kind of some of the back-end support from Microsoft WVD, and then on the Parallels side, of course, you can enhance and extend the Parallels implementation that you're already using, and then take advantage of a lot of things that we provide, obviously, such as the brokering, the universal printing and scanning, the pre-launch capabilities that we have, the integration that we've added in with FS Logics, and the image optimizations. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then, of course, the security policies for the clients, leveraging and monitoring, and all sorts of the usual goodness that Parallels brings. So, if we take a look at the architecture, as I said, it is very much based on Microsoft's own stuff up in Azure. They've got their own way of doing it, their own way of deploying it. We can't just, unfortunately, integrate and deploy it just like we would a remote desktop server, right? Wouldn't that be just easy if we could just pick that and do it? But nope, they've got their own implementation up there, and so we're going to have to integrate with that. So there's a couple of layers of this to kind of get it to working. One of the things that we must do, of course, is we can run in single or multi-session WVD hosts, but that means we're going to have to lay down two different agents on it. We've got to have a desktop agent to treat it as a desktop, and at the same time a management agent like we would add on a remote desktop server for the WVD server, or host, I guess. Kind of hard to think of Windows 10 as a server, for instance, but we would add both of those on there, and that allows us to kind of manage it in both ways at once. It's a little bit different in that regard. The other thing too, and this is a bit of a Microsoft limitation just to kind of keep in mind, is that it only works using the Parallels client for Windows, and that again is because we're brokering and doing the connection, but we're also having to hand it off to the WVD desktop as well. So because of that, you can really only use the Parallels client for Windows in order to get this to work. So if you're coming from a Mac, you're not going to be able to use WVD. If you want to use the HTML5 only interface or an iPad or something like that, again, you're going to have to go with the Parallels client. And that's just kind of a Microsoft limitation. There's a lot of steps to this because we do have to run it up on Azure and we do have to integrate in there with it. We've got some knowledge base articles that will allow you to walk you kind of through this. The first one is what you call it the prerequisites, but it's really just walking you through the Azure side, what you have to do up in the Azure ED, register your apps, set the permissions, and so forth. There's a follow-on document there for configuration. We'll walk you through that. And then one resource I don't want you to forget about too is the admin guide. The prereq document in particular, and a little bit of the configuration document, but they assume you know a little something about Azure, and if they just show you pictures, you'll instantly be able to browse and go there. It is possible, if you're not super familiar with Azure, that you can be going right down that prerequisites document and then kind of get lost. Like, where does this go? What is that step? We seem to have jumped here. It's just an assumption that was made that, you're kind of familiar with Azure. It's not our product. That's part of why it was done that way. However, the administrator guide has a lot more detail. It doesn't have all the pictures, but it's got a lot more detail. So if you're going down one of these other two knowledge base articles and then you kind of get lost a little bit, switch over to the admin guide and pull that up as a reference, and that will often bridge the gaps. In fact, it will just about always bridge the gaps. So kind of keep that up there as well. And between those, you should be able to not have too much trouble to get through this. And then the final knowledge base article is there are some client-side requirements. I talked about Windows, but Windows clients rather, but also if you're going to be, there's some other requirements on there as well. Generally, a fully patched Windows 10 should work, but if you're connecting from an older Windows client, such as say Windows 7, there may be a couple other things that you've got to do. Okay, and then as we kind of go through some of these requirements and tips real quick, just ahead of the demo, keep in mind that if you're going to wanted to use Windows 7 WVD, that's not supported by RAS. We're doing purely Windows 10 at this point. We do recommend that, if you're going to be managing WVD within RAS, you keep managing WVD within RAS. Don't switch over and try to manually manage it on the Azure side. That can break things and break the link between Parallels and Microsoft Azure as far as the WVD is concerned. So it could make you lose that WVD host. There are ways to recover from that. There's some knowledge base articles there, and support, of course, can help, but it's best just not to get in that in the first place. So if you're going to use WVD with Parallels, manage that WVD instances with Parallels. And then, of course, I did mention it's going to require just the Parallels client for Windows only. That's just kind of the nature of the beast in terms of where we are. And also keep your Azure subscription information handy right in front of you, because you can see from the screenshot we are going to be having to add in a lot of this information here. Part of it's already filled out for you, that's the subscription details, but the rest of it you're going to have to do some copy and paste. And as I'm talking about that, I got to say that copy and paste functionality down on the IDs down here and the keys are a little finicky. It can be kind of hard. You can't just have your cursor sitting in there and then get a nice copy and paste. What I was doing was just doing the tab, so I'd kind of have my cursor up there in the name, get that typed in, tab down to description, credentials, and then tab down to the tenant ID, and then that would create like a little blue box there. It doesn't look like it fills up all the dashes, it just fills up the first dash. But if you just leave it there and then just simply do a paste, don't click around in it, but just leave it there and then do a paste, it'll properly paste in the IDs. So that's my little pro tip for this, because it is a little bit finicky, I was finding. This part, as I mentioned, the subscription details should be pre-populated, so you shouldn't have to worry about that part, at least filling it in. The tenant ID and the subscription ID, well, those are just your Azure identification keys, right? So those are up to you. You guys should have those and know where to get those. The application ID, this is the actual application ID itself. You're going to be generating, as you create this, a secret key for this application ID, and the secret key has its own ID. Everything up on Azure, every little entity up there is going to have its own ID. So if you grab the secret key, which you need to grab, don't forget to get that when you're going through the knowledge base article for the prereqs. Remember, it's got the key itself, and then it's got the ID. That ID is not what you want to plug in here. You actually want to plug in the WVD ID when you create that. And then the secret key, that goes in here. Again, this is kind of in the knowledge base articles and in the admin guide, but I just wanted to call that out a little bit more, just so we kind of have that. Okay, and with that, let's go ahead and switch over and see this in action. Okay, so I've got a pre-built RAS environment ready to go. It's fully functional. I'm just going to go ahead and take advantage of the Start Wizard to get us going here, though. Okay, and the first step is to enable the feature. It's actually disabled by default. You can do it through the wizard here, or if you go to Farm Settings and there's a Features tab, you can enable it there, which will take you right here. Generally, you'd want to put it on the publishing agent unless you need to redistribute it for some reason. Then we'll need to download the agent itself, and then the feature set, there's Standard, which is just the standard WVD features. Advanced adds in a lot of the RAS features like printer redirection and so forth that you can find very useful. And then there's also a fallback where it'll try the RAS Advanced and then go back to the standard if you need to. And since it's already downloaded, I'll just click Next, which takes us to the provider page. This is the Azure integration, so I'll give it a name, WVD. You can add additional credentials if you like, other than the ones that I'm logged in with. You just click on the little blue plus here, see if I can type this in, and then it'll just follow these sequential. So go ahead and click OK. And now we need to type in the keys. So I'll type in our tenant and subscription IDs, that application ID, and then the secret key, and then I'll click Next, and then we'll click Finish, which will launch the Windows Virtual Desktop Workspace Wizard. Okay, and then in the workspace, we can either create a new workspace or select an existing one. I could browse through here on Azure AD and see what's up there, but let's go ahead and create a new workspace. So I'll just simply call it RAS underscore workspace, feeling creative here. And then so it's validated, we need to select a resource group, so I'll do that. And we've got a lot up here. Let's see, I'll search on, I don't know, prod, and there we go. Western Europe, sure, why not? Okay, and that's done. I'll go ahead and click Next. And then we'll go ahead and launch the Virtual Desktop Host Pool, and we're going to go ahead and we can create a pool or select from an existing one. I'm going to go ahead and give it a name. I'll call it WVD Desktops. This is the pool for them, and then go on to Next, because we're creating a new pool. And there's some different options here. I'm just going to do desktops. The only thing I'll change, go Next. I could do template or standalone. Let's just do standalone to speed things up, which means I need to go find one. Now let me search. I'll just type in prod again, because I know there's some named that. And here's a few. These are actual virtual desktops, WVDs themselves. I'll pick this one. We'll go Next. Here's our Active Directory integration. What I'm doing here is allowing the users that will have the rights to access this. So I'm going to search on the WVD users and add them and click Next. And I'm going to skip the optimizations just so we can go a little bit faster here in the setup at least, and then go Next. And then that takes us back to the RAS console. If I go up to Farm, you'll see this new item up here, Windows Virtual Desktop. Let me go ahead and click Apply. And then we'll let this go ahead and verify and deploy. But here's where you can kind of go in and review a lot of the settings that we just did. You also can deploy the whole thing from here as well using that little blue plus up in the top right. You can see we're installing the agents, it's getting there. And then in just a minute, I'm going to speed this video up quite a bit here so we won't have to wait for all this to deploy out on Azure and talk. There we go, right? And now it's green, and we're all good. Okay. Okay, and if we just click on refresh here, we'll go ahead and see that the agent's updated. Okay, so what actually happened on the back end? Let's go back into the Azure portal, and we'll actually go and look at the virtual machine itself, and you'll notice that we added some tags. These tags were added via the API that RAS is calling to talk to them. And I also can go look at, I'll type in WVD Desktops here and click that. And we'll look at the application group and take a look at the assignment here, and you can see the WVD users we pulled up. I'll type in WVD again, and this time I'll actually go into the host pool, and you can see we've got a session host that's actually running in there that's been created and being used. And inside the application group, if you take a look at that, you'll see the RAS tags there as well. Okay, so that's kind of what was done on the Azure side. Again, we don't want to make too many changes in these groups and these WVD resources on the Azure side like that, because we can interfere with that link between that and RAS. I just wanted to show you what was done. Okay, so let's go back over to our RAS console, and if I go down to Publishing and click Add, let's go ahead and deploy some resources. I'll do a desktop, Next. Notice there's a new option here, Windows Virtual Desktop. Next, there it is. That's the one we just provisioned. I'll just give it a friendly name, WVD Desktop, so we know what we're clicking on. And then we'll go ahead and click Finish, and then Apply. And now if I switch back over to my client, and this is again a Windows client, refresh it, and then there's my W10 desktop just showed up, and I'll go ahead and launch it. And then what's happening is that we are actually interacting with the Windows Virtual Desktop service up in Azure. And because, remember, when we provision this, we set it up as standard, it's going to use the WVD services. So it's going to give us a password prompt right here. If I chose advanced, it makes it a little bit more seamless to the end user, and they wouldn't see that. But this way they get to... I set it like that just so we can kind of understand what's happening, because we actually are kind of leaving parallels at this point and moving into the WVD service. And there's the desktop. I bumped the resolution down so we could see the different windows here. And if I go back over to Azure, we can actually see it. So I'll go to WVD Desktops, we'll go to the session hosts, and you can see I've got one active session, and I can even go in and go into the details and drill down a little bit. So it's all right there pulling this up on Azure as you go through. And if I go back to the RAS console, I actually can see the sessions from here. So again, you don't need to do that. If I just go to Virtual Desktops, I can see that here's the host that's connected, and then under Sessions, here's my active users that I've got, right? And then I can look at the show processes. I can kind of manage the whole session from here, just like we kind of always do. So it's the same experience we have on a regular traditional stuff. I can send a message, hello, right, to the end users, and then if I go back to the virtual desktop, you can see they get this. So the exact same experience that they get. Okay, let's go ahead and get out of this. Okay, let's go back over to the RAS console, and let's do applications this time. So I'll go back to my Windows Virtual Desktop. I'll go back to the host pools. We click on the blue plus, and this time we'll do another host right? Call this one WVD apps. Next, and switch it, or keep it, I guess, at application because that's the default. Go to next. Let's do another standalone instead of the template. Next. And then I need to go find a host. So I'll go back into the same area I was before. That was under prod. And I'll pick a different WVD instance. There we go. And I'll go to next. And then I'll add my users that I want to access this. So I'll go with WVD users. And okay, they're in there. And next. And again, I'm going to turn off the optimization just so this will go quicker from a deployment standpoint. And next. And the deployment's in progress there. Okay, we can go back into the host pool and host and see what's going on. It starts off as broken. That's just while we're starting to talk to it, and it's going to quickly prepare. I sped this part of the clip up dramatically so we wouldn't have to wait. It's not horribly long, but it does take a few minutes to install all the agents and get everything verified, get the signaling straight. And there we go. Okay, it's okay. So I'll refresh, maybe another refresh. It's still finishing up a few things on the back end. While it's doing this, let's go over to Azure and take a look. So here's the session host. Let me go back up into my resource group and I'll type in WVD app, which is the new one we called. That'll refresh Azure and you can see there it is. That's the new one we just created. And if I drill into that, into the host pool, you can see it's there. It's just not quite available just yet. If I go into the application group, you can go to manage the assignments here. You can see there it is to the end user. So it's getting all of this kind of done on the back end for us. And it's just about be ready to go in just a minute. Okay, so mostly I just wanted to show you how both sides of the equation, because we're interacting with both. Let's go back to the RAS console and let's use this. Let's go into publishing. We'll go down to add. Let's do an application this time, again from a Windows Virtual Desktop. Next, very similar, right, to what we're doing before. Installed apps, yep, from here. And then it's going to query the Windows inventory if your app is registered there. And let's see what's on the system. And oh, it's got the Office suite. Let's pick, let's just grab one. Oh, Word's down here at the bottom. So I'll publish Word. How exciting. Okay, next. And there we go, finish. And then I'll go ahead and click apply. And then now it's published and available for my end users. So if I go back to my Windows workstation and refresh my my client here, there's Word. So I can go ahead and launch Word, and again, this is coming from WV Desktop. And remember, we left it at standard, so it is going to prompt me again for the password. And this is kind of that handoff back and forth between the WVD system. You can hide a lot of this again by choosing Advanced, and remember, there's also the Advanced with the fallback to this if you have to for whatever reason. Log in. It's starting my app on the desktop and configuring the remote session, and then here we go. There's Office. I'm in Microsoft Word, right? So I can launch one of the predefined templates here. It's again that very same experience that the end users would be used to in RAS, the seamless window for just Word. You notice down there it's actually using the Microsoft. If you look at the little icon, it's using the remote app. That's another reason it's Windows only, because Microsoft uses remote app, which only works for Windows. And if I launch IE, that's got the Parallels logo because that's actually using our own shell. So I can kind of bounce back and forth between both, right? And particularly if I had on that advanced option instead of the standard, the users would have a very seamless experience between WVD and traditional remote desktop services. So they could use RDSH for most things, but perhaps use WVD for application compatibility. Okay, so that'll wrap up Windows Virtual Desktops, and let's go ahead and move on.